Well, welcome to this week's episode of I was about to call it inner work, but Epic Inspire. And today we actually are going to talk about inner work. Is inner work enough to be able to help you be ethical in practice? We're going to be looking at in particular in the context of psychedelic ethics, but I think this has many of our conversations has broader implications, right? That the idea or the question is like there's things like shadow work. I even have my own free course I'm on doing it, so I'm just going to be full disclosure here, right? I definitely encourage inner work. I think it's and contemplative practices I think are essential. Also checking in with yourself and your wellness and how you feel, right? All these things are internal work and inner work things that are essential to good practice. But is it enough? So that's the question we're going to ask. And I'm just going to say straight up, without even Sam saying something, I'm going to say, no, it's not enough. Of course, it's not enough. Sam, what do you think? And
Yeah, look, I think it's yeah. I mean, the straight answer is no. It's
the
not
straight answer is
enough.
no. The straight
The
answer
answer
is
is
no.
no. Of
But then,
course,
but then it's like, okay, why is inner work not enough? Why is inner work not
yeah.
enough?
I think it is important, and I think it's important. It's to make that kind of clear from the outset that this isn't a thing that is unique to psychedelic therapy or facilitation or in the kind of uh, professions and vocations that we're in contact with in the psychedelic sphere. It's really common. It's kind of a thing that you have to do in all sort of therapeutic and
Right.
caring professions. You are expected, like counselors are expected to be aware of their biases and be aware of how they're feeling and how this affects how they interact with clients and things like that. Like there's already that expectation is there in lots of areas, but particularly I think counselling and psychology. I think there's an expectation that professionals do their own work in that regard and have some semblance of self awareness. But the idea that like there is a limit to what this does by itself.
That's
There is
right.
and I think there's been a lot of talk lately about the need for psychedelic practitioners to be, to be self-aware and to do, and and I think it's good to do their own work, to do their shadow work. I mean, they've always been talking. It's psychedelics. Everyone's always talking about doing the work,
Do the work. Yeah.
but there is a limit to what you can, there's a limit to what you can achieve with that, and there's a limit to what enough. Well, it's like enough for what. Is doing the inner work enough to be ethical? No, I would say not.
And one thing is just like, and maybe I should say this to start us off, like, the inner work is never done. So even if you agree that inner work is essential to ethical practice and being ethical in the world, I think part of the nature of it is such that we should, and maybe this is a philosophical bias as a trained philosopher, that reflecting on ourselves and our decision making on on whether what our values are and revisiting them, questioning our biases, learning and growing is a human thing. And if you want to be a good person in the world, that contemplating and engaging and reflecting in that is an ongoing activity. It's a living, growing process that's never complete. So if you
No,
actually required a certain amount of work to be done in order to be a good practitioner, uh, first of all, it would never be done. It would never be complete. And I think to even pretend as if like, oh, I've reached a sufficient level that I've earned or whatever, um, that would be deluding ourselves.
yeah,
But
and
but
again,
even more so, yeah. But you go ahead. You got it.
well, yeah, no. I was just going to say, yeah, that's right, because the work, your inner work isn't done until like you are really, uh, uh, in that sense. But also, again, in other professions, um, you do supervision, you do continuing professional education, you do all these things that there is like yes, you might qualify to be a psychologist or a counselor or a facilitator, but nowhere, in other areas of professional life do we just kind of go, oh, well, look, that's it. You don't need to do any more. That's, you can just stop thinking
You're
about things
done. You're
now.
done
You're
now.
done.
You're complete.
because
You don't have
because
to think about your practice anymore. I
no,
mean,
no,
that goes
that's right.
things like continuing education, right? The idea is that that research changes, information changes. Also, our
Well,
own experiences change,
yeah,
right?
you
And
have
who
new.
we are in our life.
Uh, you find yourself in new situations that are complex in a way that maybe you haven't dealt with before, so you can't rely on what you've done so far, and then you have to think about what you're going to do next. So like it is ongoing, but it's also that the idea of, I think, the it's not necessarily like just the static nature of it is the problem. The problem is where you privileging inner work too highly over everything else that we
Right.
kind of know and do around ethics and preventing harm and
Yeah, and I think this gets we've talked about this before, like, and a lot of people understand, right, that just because something's legal doesn't mean it's ethical. Just because there's a code of conduct doesn't mean that it's ethical, right? And just because you've done inner work doesn't mean you're ethical either, right? But we do need standards of practice, mainly when we're working together or when we want to create a manner in which we decide to agree or to agree in society to work, right? We want, for example, lawyers to have training in the law, and in the law in the state, for example, or the country that they are practicing in. We don't expect them to, like, if I was a lawyer in California, I wouldn't be expected to know the law, in Brisbane, right? But what I really liked was an example we were talking about earlier, which is, and before we started this recorded conversation about a drunk driver, and the example is this, and I just came up with it. It hasn't been well thought out yet, but like, play with me here for a minute. So imagine you have a very skilled driver who's done, all the training, all the education, who has done all the inner work that maybe we would want them to do. They've worked through, if you want to look through a chakra system lens, like, root chakra work, about financing and resources, or like they've worked on their heart and like and their compassion and giving and receiving. They've looked at, traumas and done a lot of healing work and spent a lot of time on it, and it's documented in some way, shape, or form, perhaps even. So we have like the perfect person, like the perfect practitioner. Perfect. But then they get in the car and they feel like, well, I have had some things to drink, but I feel like I'm in a good place. I feel like I'm safe enough to drive. I have some experience driving in these conditions, but I'm just going to go ahead and drive, right? And then the outcome ends up being that they end up causing an accident. And do we say that, well, obviously we're going to hold them accountable for what they've done, that a harm's occurred, that inner work, that training and education did not prevent the harm. And I know you were saying, like, you could say, like, well, maybe they didn't do enough work if they actually did that. But the fact of the matter is, well, even if you see it as a mistake, that's normal for us to make mistakes. And people who, even if they have values and they have had practice, they will can actually uh, be doing what they think is in alignment. They're doing what they think is ethical. That person isn't doing something that they think is unethical. They're doing the things that they think are ethical based on, even maybe you can argue, is overconfidence on what they believe, and they're wrong. And they're wrong.
yeah. Like there's a couple of things to pick up on. One is like the a sort of a sidebar is that even if they hadn't have caused an accident, if they'd been pulled over, say at Australia, where police do random breath tests, so they will just set up somewhere and just and just pull over a random selection of cars driving past and breath, get you to do the breathalyzer, get you to test your blood alcohol. Even if you haven't caused an accident, if you are over the legal limit for alcohol in your system, you're still going to get in trouble, just not as much trouble as if you'd caused an accident. And B, well, I think there's probably still some argument to be made that you're probably still not doing a great thing, even though you hadn't caused an accident at that point. Maybe you weren't going to cause an accident at that point, but you are, in a state where the risk of you causing an accident, all things considered, is higher, and the risk isn't just to you; it's to other people and all these other things. But so there is that. But it's this is kind of the key thing. The other point, which is more important, is the key thing where I get stuck with approaching ethics and giving too much weight to inner work, or to this kind of, I don't want to say, it just feels kind of vibe driven, ethics as vibes, or ethics as inner alignment. It's people nearly always think that they're doing the right thing. People might know that they if they're smart enough, they will know that not everyone's going to agree with them, but they will feel justified in doing what they do. Very few people do something and the entire way that they're doing it are conscious that it's not justified. That's just not a thing that people do. And what we don't want to admit, either in psychedelics or generally, is that the range of things that people can do and feel justified in doing them is actually pretty horrendous. People kill other people. People, steal and exploit and rape, and you get the people who've done these things in court, in the dock. A lot of the time they will tell you that they will give you reasons as to why the thing they did.
Deserved it.
They deserved it. They deserved it. They, there'll be some reason as to that they will some justification.
A moral justification.
That's right.
Right.
They
it's not based on not having values. It's not based on not having reflected or thought about it at all. It's
that's right. They thought about it and they went, I'm going to do that. And you only have to look at. There's lots of there's lots of examples of that. So it's if.
It's not as simple. Like sometimes ethics gets reduced to just doing an inner work, or just feeling appropriately, or even just following a code, right? Or like we know, we need a little bit of everything, right? And anything that's going to make it sound like it's just one thing or the other, or that we're not contemplating. It's like, look, we need a sort of like I'm going to say ecosystem, but like but we need a more, or even if I say holistic approach, right? In ethical theory, right, we know about utilitarianism, which looks more at the consequences, greatest good for the greatest number, which can actually be helpful for a legal system applied to large groups of people, as a sort of blanket policy, but it's not great on an individual or a case-by-case basis, which is why we have things like a court or adjudication system, where you can look at the cases and change laws based on even what would be considered exceptions, right? And we get discrimination and a lot of these biases that are in our system, in part because we've legislated a bias, or even a discrimination or racism, or sexism, all the things, and it's not because they thought that, like, for instance, like, we'll take sexism, that they thought that it actually was better for women. Right? Oh no, don't trouble them to learn how to read, or they shouldn't be voting, that wouldn't be good for them, and it wouldn't be good, right? It's easy for us to say this now, right? And maybe I should just go back to what you're saying about a majority of the time, it doesn't mean that there aren't people who do things knowing that it's not the right thing to do, or that they don't have a sort of disjoint between what they believe and what they do, right? We have that, acradication, so I would say, right? But the vast majority think they're doing the right thing, and it's only when we have these moments of, I think when we work with other people and we have accountability, we have some, it doesn't mean that you have to I don't think we should be legalistic in the sense of like everything's about the code either, right? Like the code's there to have something that shows an agreement that maybe a community has made, or within a company, or a nonprofit. I mean, or even or a cooperative have made, that this is what we're standing by. Like we're going to say that everyone needs to treat people with respect and respect autonomy and people's decision making. What allows people to meet that code is different than what the code of conduct says.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you have like codes of conduct and codes of ethics. There's different things in them. You have things. You have your expression of your organization's values. We value. Yeah, like I said, we treat everyone with respect, regardless of you know how they express gender or sexuality or sort of race or religion, etc. That tells you something about that is the values of an organization. But you also might have things that are more prescriptive, that are actual sort of enforceable, measurable red lines, where you say, well, we'll say that, but we will also say, you know, don't act corruptly, or don't, you will, or, again, if we're talking about therapy, you will, these are the situations, circumstances under which you can do certain things. You will never do this or that. Which are not included for the fun of it. They're included because they actually help stop harm.
Right. There's
Ideally.
reasons. There's reasons. There's
Yeah.
justification. It's not necessarily. I mean, maybe. I mean, well, maybe this gets to a different point. But maybe I'll give us an example. Like, let's say the code of conduct, the agreements amongst facilitators say that the ratio of facilitators to participants, you can't have one person holding space for more than, let's say, 6 people, or 10 people without additional support. Like, I mean, I don't want to give an artificially high number, but let's say someone then tries to hold space for 100 people. Like, make it extreme, right? And then like, well, then they've clearly violated what the guidelines were for facilitators, and that guideline is there for a good reason. And yes, regardless of what the code of conduct says, you should have internal work that you've done. You should have a sense of what you feel is right and wrong. I'm a big advocate for that. It's essential to do that work, but you can't say that that's all you need. That
No.
ethics, and a code of conduct is not ethics. It's a codification of agreements that have been made within a community or set of people, or principles, or let's say a practice. But I
Yeah.
wanted to
Yeah.
give that as like the contrast is like, you can also make something look like it's ethical by like, we're going to create the perfect code, or we're going to create the perfect ethical standards, and we'll put it on our website. We'll chat GPT what it says that we should have in our ethics community, our ethical practice, and have no accountability whatsoever. It has
Yeah.
all look, and the same thing could happen with inner work. I've done all the inner work, or we have all the look. We have codes. Look,
Look,
we have
we have
processes.
codes. I bought a
We
hat.
believe in reciprocity. Look, we
That's it.
state it on the site.
It's
Look,
on
we
the
have
site.
people of color on the board.
Yeah,
We
that's right.
it
It must
must
be.
be true.
Here's a photo of me in the jungle. Look at how much linen I'm wearing.
Yeah, complete with a
Yeah.
hat.
Yeah, yeah. Look, there is. You can make all the appearances of that, and then again, as
Ethics washing.
experienced
I think it's what we
ethics
talked
watch,
about
but
it.
as experienced
Yeah.
ethicists, we know that there is a whole history, particularly in the corporate side of things, where organisations had codes of ethics, and not necessarily great ones, but not the worst thing in the world, and that. Like, no code of ethics is stronger than the organizational culture and leadership of an organization. So, yeah, and there's lots of examples where there might have been codes, and if no one in the organization's interested in the code of ethics and it really is just window dressing, then it's not going to do anything.
Also, the problem with many codes out there is that they're self-serving for the business interest.
Well, yeah, they're
and
just
they're
PR.
not,
You know.
yeah, and they're just PR. Like I won't mention the company, but I remember um there is a company that I actually met with their ethics person, and got all their supplies, and they have like these videos. They even create a board game, even contracting it with a famous cartoonist at the time to make a card, and all of it was about showing compliance. It was about compliance, and educating people to what the compliance codes were in terms of what the business's standards words, or when you whistleblow, or where you call. So it was more about logistics, and showing that they're meeting certain legal restrictions, and and then they could say that they've taught it, right, that they've educated. Like same thing you get, I mean, I would get it also in university, right? They would teach us about sexual, we'd have sexual harassment trainings, or not to harass but to prevent harassment, right? um, and on discrimination and others, and a lot of them would be case studies, and we're mainly being informed of what the standard was, or what counts as harassment, or what the appropriate escalation paths were, right? They were more logistical, even though we were learning standards, right? And so I don't think anyone should be under the delusion that any code will necessarily agree with their own internal ethics.
No, but making sure that people know about it also has that, that the function of when inevitably someone does something that's against the code, they do harass someone, then also if everyone's done the training, then that's where you get to turn around and say, look, not only is this in the code, but you've done the training and signed off on it, so you knew that
Exactly.
this was against the rules. It's and like, no, I don't think anyone is, no serious ethicist, or no serious, or person who's worked in business ethics or risk management or any of these things would ever, honestly claim that any code of ethics or code of conduct is any sort of magic bullet. But it's also just watching, because there was in the last, I think there was I don't know if it was in the newsletter, but it was an article out relatively recently out from MAPS talking about various kind of ethics work that people had done, and there was a lot of discussion about approaching ethics primarily as a matter of alignment with aligning your actions with your values. And again, it's like, and that's where ethics should start, rather than with something, with codes of ethics which are portrayed as external. That the work has to be internal first, but like it just. You either, like, what alignment with what, alignment with, like, you either, if as someone who's spent a lot of time teaching professional ethics at university, we have this approach where we talk about giving people tools and stuff, but by the time I got towards the end of my career teaching ethics, I knew that, like, it's not, like, when you're teaching professional ethics, it's not value neutral. Like when you're
That's absolutely right.
it is not, you're not going, here's a bunch of tools, I don't care how you use them. Here's a bunch of tools, I'm going to teach this class in such a way that you are going to feel justified using them to argue for any and all behavior. No, these ethics education for professions has embedded in it specific values. Now, how they get there is complicated, but it's like, to go, like, you're never just teaching alignment. Someone is talking about ethics as value alignment. You're always if you're not smuggling in some kind of ethics underlying this, some actual values underlying this on how you want it to be applied, you're probably just being disingenuous, because of course you are. No one
Well,
goes,
and that's exactly it. Like, well, and I want to say a few different things on this. Like, well, one is just like the fact it's like sometimes this is confusing personal ethics with like professional ethics, right? And it doesn't mean if you're like okay, like you know when I was working professionally in tech, right, at Apple, right, it doesn't mean that there weren't codes of conduct that we had to abide by and that we agreed to, But that's different than saying what my personal values and my personal ethics are, or what I feel is important for me as a person or a person of character, right? Even learning martial arts, there's, one of the one of the maybe I shouldn't mention which one, but like they have value standards. Like it was like one of them was honesty, integrity, and respect, and we even had to repeat it, right? I had to know it, uh, and those were the values, right? But also very clear values, right? Well, if you're being dishonest, then like what's the standard of honesty can be a little bit easier, perhaps. But one is just this aspect of confusion about, I don't think companies or organizations should step on personal ethics. That it's actually a personal autonomy issue at some point. That if you're saying I need to do inner work or inner ethics or feel a particular way, you're actually crossing the barrier, a respected boundary to my autonomy, to where my autonomy begins and my agreement with you as a member of the organization or as a professional starts, right? There's a duty to profession. Like if you think about, sometimes I give this example about a professional firefighter, right? That the average person doesn't have a duty or an obligation to run into a burning building, right? We
Yeah.
would say it's good for them to do it. It'd be supererogatory, good action for them to do. But if you're a firefighter and the profession is, you've agreed as part of your profession and also been trained to go into those burning buildings, right? Then you actually then you have a duty to go in there, and it's part of your profession that you've consented to, right? So it's no longer. I mean, we'd still say it was good if you saved people and you risked your life, and it's a worthy profession, and respect to all firefighters out there. But we we actually do have different standards of conduct based on what your profession is, based on what your role and responsibility is, and that's different from what your personal responsibility is, right? And and the other point I was going to make, and I know I'm trying to fit a lot in here, is that a lot of times this also doesn't make clear the fact that a lot of these problems happen in these sort of ethical real challenges, real dilemmas, not because values weren't being implemented, it's because they competed against other values. And that's the part that I feel like people don't get. It's like, and that they're enmeshing here. It's like you're going to need a way of discernment between like what I myself feel guided to do, or even if you're spiritually, or what you're spiritually committed to, or what your inner work has guided you, and what you've agreed to professionally, or what you've agreed to as part of an organization, versus like what are the values of the organization may not agree with mine, right? And the organization needs to do its own inner work then. Like, well, what does that look like to talk about it?
Hmm. Yeah, look, I think that's right. There's conflicting values, and as people will may often experience, if they can identify it, and a lot of people can, you end up with it's your values conflicting with the organization, but also your values conflicting with other values that you also hold. Um,
That's right.
uh, and part of what you can do, and part of what I suspect is happening a lot of the time when people are talking about an approach of inner work with regard to ethics, is to try and bring out this, help people better identify this conflict, between a value that pushes them one way and a value that pushes them, because you're trying to, you're taking actions, you're trying to fulfill your values, and you have you you are trying to fulfill sort of different ideas of what you value or what you want. So you can kind of do a lot by helping people become more aware of when there is a conflict between a value that's perhaps more self-serving, and a value that's more about the well-being of someone else.
And I think this is part of it, is that I think sometimes what gets me about this stuff is that it doesn't recognize that there will be conflicts of value, and you like if you, I mean, I'll use the right to life thing, whatever, I don't mean to trigger people, but in any case, like if you don't believe abortion is killing, right, then, and and your workplace does abortions, if you decide to work there, you're going against your own values, right? Or vice versa, right? Like if they don't allow or permit that choice, right, and you decide that you feel strongly that that's important to you, and you decide to work there, right? Like you can see where these personal values can compete or be outright counter to what the organization decides, and you may not know what that is in advance, right? Like in the current political climate we find ourselves in now, a lot of issues have come up. Let's, for instance, the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. Recent, at least in the United States, recent deaths in Minnesota involving ICE. And how to respond to these sort of things. Like, not just about preservation of life, which I think is obviously very important personally. But what values are more important. They're values in conflict. It's not because they don't have values. It's not because they haven't done inner work. It's not because there isn't code of conduct for like ICE agents in theory. Right? It's because of how it's actually being done in practice. And in ethics, I think we need to accept that there's going to be a certain amount of disagreement, and we need to be able to handle the disagreement. And if people spend all this time lip serving codes or inner work or shadow work, whatever the thing is, I don't care what it is, right? Or even the legal things, and they don't actually have a way of supporting and managing conflicts, challenges, accountability, that's where the real, or even working on discernment and getting feedback, and more than a pure support circle, because that, a support circle isn't going to help you be accountable in the same way, right? So I don't know. I mean, maybe we should stop there. I know we're getting close to time now, but that's one of the things is like, if I've seen so many websites where they're saying they're looking like they have ethics, or you have someone who makes maybe even us, right? Like a YouTube post or a LinkedIn or a Twitter response, and I'm not talking about canceling. I'm just talking about people putting forward what they think people want to hear, right? Or trying to be clickbaity, and really ends up actually undermining ethics. I think that's what really bugs me, is that they look like they're trying to speak to ethical issues, but really what they've done is they've undermined ethics. In reality, they've actually undermined ethical practice, and just to market their brand, which is like, that's not a good enough reason or justification for me ethically on my values to justify using ethics that's often done in the psychedelic space and in the world to leverage their position. It's ethics isn't marketing.
No, very clearly, it is not, as we have discovered to our detriment. Yes. I think many times.
That's the thing. It's like, but everyone wants to market ethics. Everyone wants to market ethics. No one is going to say that they're unethical, even if they're the most unethical practitioners on the planet.
Of course not.
And they know it.
And they know it. Except
or they have a bad track record, or they have multiple trials where there's complaints. Or, they'll always are going to, like consistently, they're going to hide those issues, even if they mediate out solutions. They have the most legal cases, or even they have a reputation of causing harm. It's the other pieces that are missing. I don't know. Just don't be fooled by the marketing gimmicks, or don't just take the website at face value. You need to really look at real actions, real practice over time.
Yeah,
whether it be an individual or a community or organization.
Look, maybe in an ideal world, if people were inherently good enough, whatever that means, if everyone who was good did enough inner work, then it would be enough. But people aren't good or evil. People have values, and their values point them towards particular actions, and no amount of if your values give you reason to think that a particular kind of people don't have the same sort of moral worth as everyone else, whether that's because of sex or skin color or whatever. If those are the values that someone genuinely holds, no amount of inner work is going to make that person ethical.
Yeah.
Like it's just not. That's just not how it works. Just like if someone holds their values, no amount of ayahuasca or LSD or mushrooms is going to make that person ethical. It's in the more that I think about it, the more I think it's still kind of trying to smuggle that same trope of where, oh look, if everyone just got high, the world would be great. Like, I don't think we have a lot of reason to believe that, and I think we have just about as much reason to believe that inner work by itself makes people good. You know.
Well, and as we like, we also have no way of really testing that other than what they do in the world. So even
Yes.
if we want that to be the standard, we don't really have a good way of knowing that. And like and I mean like and Sam, I trust you. but but it's like and I've never really asked. I mean, I don't think this is exposing anything, but it's like, oh, Sam, how much shadow work have you done? Like, oh, Sam, like we need to be accountable to how much shadow work
Right,
you've
how
done.
much shadow work we want? Well, look, okay.
Yeah,
I will just go and get. I got my shadow work scan done. The other week they put me in the
great.
it put me in the MRI, and you confront your shadow while in the machine, and they can tell you how much shadow work you've actually done. Except of course that there is no. I could tell you anything, and as long as I make up a plausible sounding story about the shadow work I've done and the inner work I've done, you will go, well, yeah, that sounds plausible, and you will assign something about me that's completely unobservable based on the story and my actions. You're never going to know how much. We will never know, really, and this is part of the. This is
We'll
this.
never know. But why do
We'll
I
never
trust
know.
you? See, the thing is like, but why do I know I can trust you? And it's
Yeah,
like
but
it's because over time, through relationship, which is this is the other point, right? I like to, like that's not being brought up in these other, sets. They're not talking about building relationship. They're not talking about like what really creates, well, I mean, maybe they'll give lip service to, building communities, building, right, through time, through, like you hear the phrase like building at the speed of trust, growing at the speed of trust. That's about relationship. That's, and you'll be able to see through relationship by working with people, whether they're like, if they never show up to meetings on time, you can't say that the person's a timely person, right? Or that they care about being on time. Like, oh, I really care about being on time. It's a very essential value to me. I have it on my website, but then they never show up on
yeah.
time.
You
Like,
look at
clearly it's not important.
it's just in real life. What do? You look at how people act most of the time over time. What do people normally like? How do people what actions do they normally take? And things like do people regularly do what they say they're going to do?
That's right. That
That's the
ethical
core of
consistency, that lack of
ethical.
hypocrisy,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Or if they say they're going to do something and they can't do it, do they let me know beforehand? And do they have good reasons why they can't do something, or do they just not feel like it?
Right.
Like stuff like that. But that is actual knowing someone and having a relationship with them, and not just sprinkling the word relational through
Right.
your
We're
blurbs
we're
on
not
your
name
website.
dropping ethics terms, people, to show that we're ethical, right?
Yeah, but
Otherwise,
that is, but see, none of that tells you. Like you infer things, but you've learnt that I'm going to act consistently in a particular manner, but you didn't learn that because of like that. We never know for sure what other people's inner experience is. We never know for sure what other
that's right.
people's inner world is, and that's why and that's just the human condition. You never know exactly how someone else.
Absolutely.
You just know what they say and the sounds they make and the
And it
expression on their
doesn't mean
face.
that intentions don't matter. Intentions do matter. Inner work does matter, right? All this stuff matters. And then this kind of gets to logic, which often is missing in many fields. But it's like just because it's necessary, it doesn't mean it's sufficient.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
necessary, but it's not sufficient. It is necessary to do inner work, but it's not sufficient for ethical practice. It is necessary often to have standards of conduct or to have laws, right? But it's not sufficient for ethics, right? Where no one's going to say that we should remove all laws and rely on people's inner work. And no one's
Yeah.
going to
Yeah.
say that, just because it's not all, and no one's going to like ban inner work in exchange for just laws or for codes of conduct. I think again any of those approaches like oversimplify it, or even just relying on just trust and the handshake. We want to have clearly written down what we've agreed to, and sometimes that's more important than others depending upon your relationship and what you feel comfortable with individually and relationally and professionally and and all the things. But anyway, I'm going off because we can get excited about these things. Almost maybe I should mention this. I wanted to mention one more thing. I was going to mention the Ford Pinto case. This is one of the things that made me think. I mean, like in terms of a business ethics case that like it's used a lot, and I can't go into the full details, but suffice to say they knew that there was a problem with the Ford Pintos that could cause a fire and risk the life of the driver and passengers, and they made an economic choice and they calculated out what was the cost of the legal cases based on the amount of the errors that they expected to see in the line compared to what what it would cost to fix the problem. And they
That's right.
decided that they literally looked at the bottom line, accounting wise, financially, and decided that, well, it was going to cost them less money to pay off the legal suits of people actually being killed and harmed than it was to fix the problem. And so they intentionally decided not to fix the problem.
Yes.
So again, it's not that they didn't have a value. They definitely had a value. It's just not one that valued human life
Yeah.
and the known risk in comparison to those economic things that were being valued above that. And I think we see that in a lot of
And
places
people
in the world.
argued that they were completely justified in doing so. Like, and we talked about. I as you know, I've used that example in class with engineering students. Uh, and a lot of them find it kind of horrific. But there's always a couple of guys in class, and it's always guys. I'm sorry, guys, who will go, no, that is justified. There's values. They applied the values, and I, so I don't know
And
that
this is just it. That's again like like we're going to make that's why it's like knowing what the values are, knowing what your values are, knowing what what organization values are, how do they actually apply those values. I don't know. I mean, I'm like, I guess this is like a really rich topic. I'm trying to close it out, but it's like it makes me think about like sometimes I would tell my students like, look, I'm not going to teach you to be ethical. I'm going to be teaching you tools, and you're going to be doing practices and reflecting and working through it. That itself will make you make better decisions because you would have thought through them. In events you'll have practice in reflecting and using your faculties of reason as well as applying your values, as well as seeing and understanding and not reinventing the wheel, which is something you were mentioning of like a lot of times we're seeing people reinventing the world of ethics without knowing that they are. But I guess I just want people to take away the idea that um, you use your discernment, but don't don't be dissuaded by any particular headline, uh, LinkedIn post, or website espousing an amazing ethical process. And I think I would say get more skeptical either if they have no explanation at all, or if they have too much. If they have too much, it's like um, I want to, and same thing goes with like reviews. Like you don't know what the testimonial was really about. People give it too much weight. There's a lot of you know errors in judgment we make simply because we believed in the cult of personality, or we believed, in what people were saying versus what they were doing. And as
Hmm.
someone who's made that mistake multiple times personally myself, um, I just want, I just really want people to make better choices and not think and not overly simplify or reduce ethics to any of these particular areas. So to the original question is like, is inner work enough? No, it's not. but it is important, but it's not sufficient. And your personal work should be distinguished from your work with others, and your work in what you should be doing as a professional per se, right? That there's an overlap that's necessary, but don't be confused in thinking that, or don't even allow like that someone to determine what you should be doing personally, based on what they're deciding as a structure, unless that's part of your professional code or your personal code, and that's an alignment.
Hmm.
That you need to have that inner awareness first, and there should be healthy boundaries around those relationships.
I think we've covered
I
everything. I
think we
think
covered
we've
it.
covered
We're,
enough.
we're
We will
done.
just keep
Don't
going. If we
stop
don't
yet.
stop, we will just
We
keep
don't
going.
stop. But anyway, so if you've stayed this long, you follow follow us. Share it with others, hype it. Uh, we're finding our way here. We're always open to feedback, and we hope you enjoyed this discussion. If there's things you want us to talk about or you're curious about, uh, we would love to hear from you. So thank you much for listening. Take care.